The rain had been falling since morning, soft at first, then turning into that steady, heavy kind that made the streets smell of dust and oil. Daniel sat behind the wheel of his old sedan, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel while waiting for the traffic light to turn green. His day had already gone downhill before it even started. His landlord had left another note on his door, reminding him that rent was late. His boss had called earlier, not to offer a shift, but to say they were cutting hours again. Life, it seemed, was picking on him. He glanced out the window and saw people rushing under umbrellas, couples holding hands, parents carrying bags of groceries. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to be, something to look forward to. Daniel, on the other hand, felt like he was stuck in a loop. Work, worry, repeat. The light turned green, and he pressed the accelerator, the car coughing before moving forward. The wipers squeaked against the windshield, barely keeping up with the downpour. He was heading to a convenience store a few blocks away, the kind of small place that stayed open late and sold everything from snacks to batteries. He wasn't in the mood to cook, and the last thing in his fridge was a half-empty bottle of mustard. When he pulled into the parking lot, it was almost full. The only open spot was narrow, wedged between a shiny SUV and a pickup truck. He turned the wheel carefully, trying to slide in without scraping either side. Just as he started to straighten the car, another vehicle pulled up fast from the other direction, cutting him off and sliding halfway into the same spot. Daniel hit the brakes hard, his heart jumping. The driver's door of the other car opened and a woman stepped out. She looked calm, maybe mid-30s, wearing a gray jacket and jeans, her hair tied back neatly. She didn't look his way at first, just locked her car and started walking toward the store. Daniel rolled down his window and called out, "Hey, you didn't see I was parking here?" The woman turned, a little surprised but not rude. "Sorry, I thought the space was free." "I was already turning in," Daniel said, his voice sharp. "You just cut me off." She took a step closer, the rain pattering on her jacket. "Look, it's just a parking spot. There's another one around the back." Daniel felt heat rise in his chest. "That's not the point. You can't just swoop in like that. You think you own the place?" Her tone stayed calm. "No, I don't. I just made a mistake." "Relax, all right? Relax." That word always rubbed him the wrong way. It felt like being told to shut up nicely. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Don't tell me to relax," he said, louder this time. "People like you think you can do whatever you want." "People like me?" She repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," he said bitterly. "People who think rules don't apply to them." The woman sighed, glanced around the lot, then said quietly, "It's raining, and this isn't worth fighting about. Take the spot." She stepped back toward her car, about to move it, but Daniel waved his hand dismissively. "Forget it. Keep it. I'll find another one." He drove off, tires splashing through puddles. His chest felt tight, like anger had nowhere to go. Why did small things always set him off lately? Maybe it wasn't really about the parking spot. Maybe it was about the feeling that his life had become one long series of people taking things from him. His job, his time, his peace. He parked farther away and walked through the rain toward the store. Inside, the hum of refrigerators filled the air. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The woman from earlier was already there, standing near the counter with a cup of coffee in her hand, reading the label on a snack bar. When she noticed him, her eyes flicked toward him briefly, then she turned away. No smirk, no attitude, just quiet. Daniel grabbed a few instant noodles, a sandwich, and a bottle of water. He waited in line behind her, trying not to look in her direction, but his mind wouldn't stop replaying the argument. Why did she look so calm when he was still fuming inside? At the counter, she paid, thanked the cashier, and left. When Daniel stepped outside a few minutes later, she was gone. The spot where her car had been was empty. He sighed and muttered to himself, "Good riddance." The rain had slowed by then, leaving a damp chill in the air. Daniel sat back in his car, opened the sandwich, and took a bite. It tasted like cardboard, but he wasn't really hungry. He was just tired. He stared at the steering wheel for a long time, thinking about how easily he'd lost his temper again. It was becoming a pattern. An argument with a neighbor, a fight with a coworker, now this. Every time something didn't go his way, he snapped. He told himself it wasn't his fault. People kept pushing him. Life kept testing him. Still, deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He just didn't know how to fix it. When he finally drove home, the night had turned cold and quiet. The apartment complex was dark except for one flickering light near the stairs. Inside, the room smelled like old coffee and damp clothes. The walls were bare except for a small calendar with red circles around overdue bills. He tossed his keys on the table, sank into the chair, and stared at nothing. Another day gone and nothing had changed. The next morning, the sun came through the blinds in thin stripes. Daniel rubbed his eyes and reached for his phone. There were 3 missed calls from his friend who sometimes helped him get odd jobs. He called back right away. "You still need that delivery run?" Daniel asked. "Yeah," the voice on the other end said. "Small job. A few boxes from the warehouse to the downtown store. Pays cash." "Perfect," Daniel said. He needed the money. He grabbed a coffee from a street vendor and hit the road. The drive was long, but the quiet helped. The city looked cleaner after the rain. Puddles on the asphalt, sunlight glinting off wet rooftops. For a brief moment, he felt calm again, almost hopeful. That peace didn't last long. At the warehouse, one of the workers was late, which meant Daniel had to wait. He leaned against the truck, scrolling through his phone. That's when he saw her again, the woman from the parking lot. She was standing by a dark sedan across the street, talking to someone through the window. She looked the same, calm, focused, but there was something about her body language this time, confident, alert. She wasn't here by accident. Daniel frowned, watching as she finished the conversation and walked away, disappearing around the corner. What were the odds? Twice in 2 days? He shook his head. Coincidence, big city. People ran into each other sometimes. He brushed it off. By evening, he was back home counting the small stack of cash he'd earned. It wasn't much, but it covered groceries and gas. Still, the weight on his shoulders didn't lift. He needed something bigger, a steady job, a reason to get up in the morning. He promised himself that starting next week he'd look harder, but life had other plans. 2 nights later, he met some old friends at a local bar. It wasn't anything fancy. Dim lights, cheap beer, and music that was always a little too loud. They talked about old times, jobs that went nowhere, and the usual frustrations. For a few hours, Daniel forgot about everything. He laughed. He drank more than he should have. He started to feel alive again. Then, as always, something small turned big. One of his friends bumped into a stranger near the counter, spilling a drink. Words were exchanged, shoulders squared. Daniel tried to calm things down at first, but when someone shoved him, his temper flared again. Before long, the situation turned noisy. A chair tipped over. The bartender shouted for everyone to stop. Daniel raised his hands, trying to explain, but it was too late. Someone must have called the police. The flashing lights came through the window, red and blue cutting through the smoky air. Panic spread through the crowd as officers stepped inside, ordering everyone to stay put. Daniel's pulse raced. He hadn't done anything serious, but he'd been shouting. He'd pushed someone, maybe. He couldn't even remember clearly. The next thing he knew, his hands were behind his back, cold metal clicking around his wrists. Outside, the night air hit him like ice. The officer who led him to the car didn't say much. Daniel kept trying to explain it was a misunderstanding, but nobody seemed to care. He was just another loud guy in a fight. At the station, everything felt surreal. The buzzing lights, the sound of doors locking behind him. They put him in a small room with a metal table and 2 chairs. He stared at the wall, wondering how his life had come to this. He wasn't a bad person, not really. He just made bad choices when anger took over. After what felt like an hour, the door opened. Daniel looked up, expecting another uniformed officer. Instead, in walked the same woman from the parking lot. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. She closed the door behind her, calm as ever, a folder in her hand. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something small and shiny. A badge. Daniel blinked. "You're kidding me." Her eyes met his. "Detective Clara Brooks," she said, her voice steady. "We meet again." Daniel's jaw tightened, words failing him. The woman he'd yelled at in the rain, the one he thought was just another civilian, was standing there as a detective. The same calmness that had irritated him before now made perfect sense. She hadn't been scared or annoyed. She'd been in control the whole time. He leaned back in his chair, speechless. A mix of shame and disbelief washed over him. Life really had a way of throwing surprises. Clara set the folder on the table, her expression unreadable. "Looks like you've had quite a week," she said quietly. "Let's talk about it." Daniel didn't respond. His mind was spinning, like about the parking lot, the bar, and how fast things could change. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that maybe this wasn't just bad luck. Maybe it was something else, a lesson he hadn't learned yet. He lowered his gaze, the sound of rain still echoing faintly in his memory. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel didn't feel angry. He just felt tired. The sound of the door clicking shut echoed through the small interrogation room. Daniel sat frozen, his eyes locked on the woman standing in front of him. She moved with quiet confidence, not in a rush, not trying to show power, just steady and controlled. She laid her folder on the metal table, opened it, and took out a few papers. Daniel still couldn't believe it. The same woman he had yelled at in the rain, the one he had accused of thinking she was above rules, was a detective. Not just someone passing by, not a random face, but a police officer who was now in charge of questioning him. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. For a few seconds she didn't speak. She just studied him with calm eyes that made him shift in his seat. It wasn't the kind of stare that judged or mocked. It was the kind that looked right through someone searching for what was real. Finally, she said softly, "You've had a rough few days, haven't you?" Daniel gave a small, bitter laugh. "You could say that." She leaned back slightly, her voice even. "You were at the Rusty Oak last night. There was a fight. You were seen arguing before things got out of hand." "I didn't start it," Daniel said quickly. "I was just trying to calm things down. But one guy shoved me and I lost my temper. That's all." "Lost your temper," she repeated, writing something down. "Seems to be a pattern with you." Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. He thought of the parking lot, the shouting, how he had made himself look like a fool in front of her. "Look," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I didn't mean for any of it to happen. I just got angry. It's been a bad week." She glanced up. "Bad weeks happen to everyone. But not everyone ends up in handcuffs because of them." Daniel dropped his eyes to the table. "Guess I'm just unlucky." There was silence for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you know why we're interested in what happened last night?" "I thought it was just a bar fight." "It's more than that," she said quietly. "That bar is connected to an investigation we've been working on for months. The people you fought with. One of them is linked to a larger case." Daniel frowned, confused. "Linked to what?" "I can't give you all the details," she said. "But you were there at the wrong time. Or maybe the right time, depending on how you look at it." He looked up. "So what happens now? Am I in trouble?" "That depends," she said. "Right now you're being held for questioning, not charged. But if you cooperate, and if you're honest with me, this could go a lot easier for you." Daniel rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had left faint marks. "Cooperate how?" "I just need you to tell me everything you saw and heard that night," she said. "Anything unusual? Any names, any conversations you overheard?" He nodded slowly. "All right." For the next half hour, Daniel told her everything he remembered, who he had been with, what started the argument, how the fight began. He described the man who had shoved him, how another guy seemed nervous the whole time, how someone slipped out the back door before the police arrived. Clara listened closely, occasionally taking notes but never interrupting. Her calmness made it easier to talk. Daniel found himself saying more than he had planned, not just about that night, but about how lost he'd been feeling lately, how angry he was at life. He didn't know why he was opening up like that, but there was something about her that made it feel safe. When he finally stopped talking, the room was quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent light. She closed her notebook and looked at him. "You know," she said slowly, "you're lucky." "Lucky?" he asked, almost laughing. "I'm sitting in a police station." "Still lucky," she replied. "If you'd hit the wrong person last night, you could be facing serious charges. But from what I can tell, you didn't mean harm. You just let your emotions take over." Daniel sighed. "Story of my life." She gave a small nod, then stood up. "I'm going to step out for a minute. Someone will bring you some water." He watched her leave, the sound of her boots fading down the hall. When the door closed again, Daniel leaned back and stared at the ceiling. He felt a strange mix of embarrassment and relief. Embarrassed that he had yelled at her before. Relieved that she didn't seem like she wanted to ruin his life. He thought about the look in her eyes. Steady, but not cold. Maybe she'd seen too many people like him. People on the edge of losing control. After a while, she returned. She placed a small plastic cup of water on the table and sat down again. Here's the situation, she said, her tone practical but not harsh. You're not being charged with anything today. We just need you to stay available for a follow-up. There's a chance you might have seen something that helps our case. Daniel frowned. So that's it? I can go? Yes, she said. But I want you to think about something. He raised an eyebrow. What's that? She folded her hands on the table. You seem like someone who's been fighting a lot. Not just with people, but with life. I see that more often than you'd think. Sometimes it's not about what happens around you. It's about what you carry inside. Daniel looked down. Her words hit deeper than he wanted to admit. You sound like a therapist, she smiled faintly. Comes with the job. We deal with people at their worst moments. He nodded slowly. Well, you met me at one of mine. I noticed, she said, but her voice was gentle. She stood up, collected her papers, and opened the door. An officer will walk you out. Take care of yourself, Daniel. He paused before standing. Hey, he said, his voice quiet. About that parking lot. I was out of line. She turned slightly, meeting his eyes. I know, but you're not the first person to snap at me. Just try not to make it a habit. He gave a weak smile. I'll work on it. She nodded once, then left the room. Outside, the air felt colder than he remembered. He walked out of the station, hands shoved in his pockets, mind spinning. The streets were quiet, a thin mist hanging in the air. He couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just brushed against something bigger, like fate had stepped in wearing a badge. Over the next few days, Daniel tried to go back to normal. He kept busy with small delivery jobs, tried avoiding the bar, and stayed out of trouble. But he couldn't stop thinking about the detective. He didn't even know why. Maybe it was because she'd seen him at his worst and hadn't treated him like garbage. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, not with judgment, but with understanding. He found himself wanting to prove something. Not to her exactly, but to himself. He started waking up earlier, cleaning his apartment, even applying for real jobs again. For the first time in months, he felt a small spark of purpose, but life has a way of testing people when they start to change. One afternoon, while dropping off a package downtown, he saw something that caught his attention. A group of men standing near the same bar where the fight happened. One of them looked familiar, the guy who had shoved him that night. He was talking fast, looking around nervously. Daniel slowed down, pretending to check his phone as he listened. A black car pulled up beside them. The driver rolled down the window, said something quick, and handed one of the men a small envelope. It wasn't a friendly meeting. The tension in the air was thick. Daniel's stomach tightened. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew it wasn't good. He thought of what Clara had said, that the bar was connected to something bigger. Maybe this was it, he hesitated. He could walk away and mind his own business. He didn't want more trouble, but something inside him told him to do the right thing this time. He quickly wrote down the car's plate number on his delivery sheet and left quietly. That night, he couldn't sleep. The image of that meeting kept replaying in his head. Finally, he took a deep breath and made a decision. He searched for the card she had given him, the one with her name and number. The next morning, he called. Detective Brooks. Her voice answered. It's Daniel, he said. From the other night, a pause. I remember. What's going on? I think I saw something you might want to know about. Within an hour, they met near a coffee shop downtown. She arrived in plain clothes, her hair pulled back the same way as before. Daniel explained everything, the men, the car, the envelope. She listened carefully, jotting notes, her eyes sharp and focused. You sure about the details? She asked. Positive, he said. I even wrote down the plate number. She nodded slowly, then looked at him. That's good. You did the right thing calling me. Daniel felt an unexpected sense of pride. Does it help your case? It might, she said. We've been trying to track a few of those people for weeks. You may have just given us something important. He smiled slightly. Guess I'm useful after all. You always were, she said quietly. You just needed a reason to see it. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt respected. Not pitied, not dismissed, but valued. That one simple sentence from her carried more weight than she probably realized. As they walked toward their car, she turned to him. Stay alert for the next few days. Don't go near that bar again. If you see anything suspicious, call me right away. He nodded. Got it. She handed him a small slip of paper. Here's a safer contact number. Only use it if it's important. He tucked it into his jacket pocket, then looked at her. You really think they'll notice me? She paused before answering. Let's hope not. But just in case, be careful. Daniel drove home that day feeling different. He wasn't just some guy struggling to stay afloat anymore. He had done something that mattered. He had helped. Still, a part of him knew that being connected to this case might bring trouble his way. And though he didn't realize it yet, the small act of calling her would soon pull him deeper into a world he never expected to enter. A world where choices carried consequences far beyond what he could see. But for now, as he sat in his car watching the evening sky fade from gold to gray, Daniel felt a quiet sense of peace. Maybe things were finally starting to turn around. Maybe meeting that woman, the one he had mistaken for just another civilian, wasn't bad luck after all. Maybe it was the start of something that would change him forever. Daniel woke up earlier than usual the next morning. For the first time in a while, he didn't feel weighed down by dread. The sunlight leaking through the blinds felt softer, warmer somehow. He sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his eyes, thinking about the call he had made to the detective the day before. He still couldn't believe how easily he had decided to contact her. A week ago, he would have never imagined working with a police officer, especially not her. But something about her calm voice, the way she had looked at him like he still had a chance to get his life together, made him feel like he wasn't completely lost. He made a cup of instant coffee, sat near the small window of his apartment, and watched the city come alive. Buses rolled past, people hurried to work, car horns echoed faintly in the distance. He felt like one of them again, a part of something, not just a man floating through bad luck. But as the day went on, a quiet worry grew in his mind. What if the men he saw near the bar realized he had noticed them? What if they found out he'd talked to the police? He tried to push the thoughts away, convincing himself that he was just being paranoid. Still, he checked the locks twice before leaving for work. He spent most of the day driving deliveries around town. Every now and then his eyes flicked to the mirrors, checking if someone was following. Nobody was, but the feeling didn't leave him completely. That evening, while stopping at a gas station, his phone buzzed. It was a message from a number he didn't recognize. Need to meet. Tonight. 8 p.m. Same coffee shop. CB. He read it twice before replying with a simple, okay. At 8 sharp, he was sitting in the corner of the small cafe, the one with chipped tables and old music playing softly from the speakers. A few minutes later, she walked in, wearing plain jeans, a dark jacket, and that same calm focus in her eyes. She spotted him right away and walked over. "Thanks for coming," she said as she sat down. "No problem," he said. "Everything okay?" She nodded slightly. "We've been following up on what you told me. The car you mentioned is tied to someone we've been trying to track for months. Your information helped us confirm a few things." Daniel leaned forward a bit, curious. "So I was right? Something shady was going on?" "Yes," she said simply. "And because you were there, we might need your help again. Nothing dangerous, at least not yet. Just observation," he frowned. "Observation?" "We're watching a few spots around the city where these people operate. You seem to know the area and the people there. You could notice things we might miss." Daniel hesitated. "I'm not exactly trained for this kind of thing." She gave a faint smile. "You don't have to be. Just keep your eyes open. If you see something suspicious, you call me. Directly. That's all." He nodded slowly. "All right. I can do that." "Good," she said. "And one more thing. Keep this between us. The fewer people who know, the safer you'll be." He didn't like the sound of that last part, but he understood. He promised to stay quiet. They talked for a few more minutes, mostly about safe communication and how to stay low-key. Then she stood, thanked him again, and walked out. He watched her leave, realizing how strange his life had become. Just a few days ago, he had been fighting over parking spots and getting into bar arguments. Now he was part of something real, something that mattered. But that night, as he drove home, he noticed a car behind him that made every turn he did. His pulse quickened. Maybe it was nothing, but his instincts told him otherwise. He turned into a side street, pretending to check his phone, then took another turn through an alley. The car passed by without slowing down. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Maybe he really was overthinking everything. Still, he drove straight home and stayed inside for the rest of the night. The next few days went quietly. He went to work, kept to himself, and stayed observant. He passed the bar once from a distance, but it was closed that day. He saw one of the same men outside the corner shop nearby, talking to someone through a cracked window. Daniel didn't approach. He just memorized what he saw and called Clara later. Every time they spoke, she was calm and professional, but her tone softened a little more each time. He started to notice the human side behind the badge, someone who carried a lot of responsibility but still managed to treat people with patience and respect. One night, she called him again. "We've got movement," she said. "Can you meet me at the station tomorrow morning?" "Sure," Daniel said, heart thumping a little faster. "Did something happen?" "I'll explain when you get here." The next morning, he arrived at the station. The building was old but busy. Phones ringing, footsteps echoing down the halls, the smell of coffee and paper everywhere. When Clara came out of an office to greet him, she looked a little more serious than usual. "Thanks for coming," she said, motioning for him to follow. They went into a small meeting room where another officer sat, a tall man with a clipboard. Clara introduced him as Detective Hayes. "He's helping lead the case." Hayes nodded. "We reviewed your report and the surveillance footage. You were right. Those men are part of a ring we've been investigating. But we also think they might have noticed you." Daniel froze. "Noticed me? How?" "We're not sure yet," Hayes said. "But one of them was asking around about a delivery driver who got into a fight a few weeks ago." "That could be you." Daniel's stomach dropped. "So what does that mean?" "It means you should stay alert," Clara said. "Don't panic, but don't take chances either. We'll have someone keep an eye on your place for a few days." Daniel nodded, though his hands felt clammy. "Great," he muttered. "Just what I needed." Clara looked at him with understanding. "I know it's not ideal, but this will pass." "You did the right thing," he sighed. "Feels like doing the right thing always comes with a price." "Sometimes it does," she said softly. "But it also changes things." Over the next week, Daniel tried to go about life normally, but the tension followed him everywhere. He checked over his shoulder more often. He noticed unfamiliar faces in places he frequented. It was subtle, but enough to keep him on edge. One evening, as he came home, he noticed his front door slightly ajar. His heart pounded as he pushed it open slowly. Inside, nothing looked stolen, but his things were slightly moved. A chair angled differently, a window cracked open that he swore he had closed. He didn't wait. He stepped outside and called Clara immediately. Within minutes, she arrived with another officer. They checked the apartment carefully. Nothing major was missing, but Clara's expression was tight. "Looks like someone wanted to send a message," she said quietly. Daniel swallowed hard. "So they do know who I am." "Maybe not exactly," she said, "but they're guessing, which means we move fast." That night, they relocated him temporarily, a small, quiet motel near the outskirts of the city. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. Clara assured him they'd figure things out soon. For the next couple of days, she checked in often. Sometimes just to update him, other times just to make sure he was all right. They talked about more than the case. Small things, life, how people change when pushed to the edge. Daniel began to see her not just as a detective, but as a person. Someone who'd chosen a hard job not for power, but to make a difference. On the third night, she stopped by his motel after work. She looked tired, but there was a faint smile on her face. "We got a lead," she said. "The guy who broke into your apartment was spotted at one of our surveillance points. We're moving in on them soon." Daniel nodded, relief washing over him. "That's good news." "Yeah," she said, sitting on the edge of the chair near the window. "You've handled all this better than most would." "I know it hasn't been easy." He shrugged lightly. "Guess I didn't have much of a choice." She looked at him for a moment. "Still, you didn't run." "That says something." He gave a small smile. "You know, I used to think people like you had it easy, just flashing badges and telling others what to do. But now I see it's more than that." She tilted her head slightly. "And what do you see now?" "I see someone trying to keep things together," he said quietly. "Even when it's messy." Clara didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked out the window, the city lights reflecting faintly on the glass. "It's messy most of the time," she admitted. "But sometimes you meet people who remind you why it's worth it." For a moment, the air felt still, not heavy, just real. After she left that night, Daniel lay awake for hours thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. The anger that used to define him had started to fade. In its place was something quieter, responsibility, maybe even courage. A few days later, things took another turn. Clara called early in the morning. "We need you to come in," she said. It's about the men from the bar. We made some arrests, but one of them mentioned your name. Daniel's stomach tightened. Mine? Why? Apparently they think you might have information on a deal that went wrong. Don't worry. You're not in danger right now, but we need to clear things up fast. At the station, Daniel met Clara and her team. They questioned him about everything again. The bar, the people, the night of the fight. He told them everything honestly. By the end, Clara gave him a reassuring nod. You did good, she said. We'll take it from here. When he left the building later that day, he felt lighter. Maybe this was the end of it. Maybe his part in the story was done. But even as he walked home, something told him it wasn't over yet. He had stepped into a world he didn't fully understand. And sometimes once you crossed a line, you couldn't go back to the person you were before. Still, as he passed the same convenience store where he had first met her in the rain, he smiled faintly. That day had started as one more mistake in a long chain of bad decisions. But now, it felt like the beginning of something that might finally lead him somewhere better. Days passed more calmly than Daniel had expected. The police had made several arrests, and for a while it seemed like everything was under control. He went back to work, tried to rebuild a routine, and avoided unnecessary attention. Still, a small part of him remained alert, like a shadow that refused to disappear completely. Sometimes, when he walked home from work, he would catch himself glancing behind to make sure no one followed. Other times, he would stop mid-step, wondering if the sound of a car slowing down was just coincidence or something else. Clara checked in every few days, just to make sure he was doing fine. Their conversations had become more personal now, not about the case, but about life. She'd tell him stories from her early days on the force, how she used to second-guess every decision she made. He'd talk about the mistakes he'd made, how easy it was to lose direction when you had no one to guide you. There was something strangely comforting about those talks. It wasn't about her being a detective or him being someone she once arrested. It was just two people talking, trying to make sense of the lives they ended up with. One Saturday morning, he got a call from her. Her tone was calm, but there was something heavier beneath it. Are you free today? She asked. Yeah, Daniel said. What's going on? I can't tell you everything over the phone, but it's important. Can you meet me at the precinct around noon? Sure, he replied, though curiosity quickly turned into quiet unease. When he arrived, she was already waiting outside, wearing plain clothes instead of her usual work outfit. Her expression was serious yet not tense. Come on, she said, motioning to her car. We're going somewhere. Where? You'll see, she said with a faint smile. They drove in silence for a while, the city gradually fading into open roads lined with trees and worn-out billboards. The further they went, the more Daniel realized this wasn't a routine meeting. After about 40 minutes, she pulled into a small rest stop by a lake. It was quiet there, just a few benches, calm water reflecting the gray sky, and a couple of birds floating near the shore. She turned off the engine and looked straight ahead for a moment before speaking. I wanted to tell you something in private, she said. Something I can't exactly say in the office. Daniel felt a twist in his stomach. You're not quitting or something, right? She chuckled softly. No, not yet anyway. Then her tone grew softer. This case and the people we arrested, it's not completely over. There are still a few names we're chasing, but here's the thing. Someone on the inside might have been feeding them information. Daniel stared at her, confused. Inside, like the department? She nodded slightly. We don't know who yet, but it explains how those men knew about you. We kept your involvement off the record, but somehow they still found out. He ran a hand over his face. So you're saying someone told them? Possibly, she said. Which means until we find out who it was, I need you to stay careful. Don't share anything, not even with people who claim to be working with me. Daniel sat back, letting the words sink in. This just keeps getting bigger, doesn't it? Clara gave a faint, tired smile. That's the job. The more you uncover, the more you realize how deep it goes. For a while, neither of them spoke. The sound of the water lapping gently against the rocks filled the silence. Then Daniel asked quietly, How do you even keep doing this? Knowing you can't trust everyone around you? She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. Because you don't do it for them. You do it for the people who still need someone to try. He nodded slowly, understanding her in a way he hadn't before. That sounds lonely. It is sometimes, she admitted. But it's worth it when something good comes out of it. Like this. She turned to him. You could have walked away that night at the bar. But you didn't. You decided to do something. Daniel gave a small, almost shy smile. I didn't think it would matter much. It did, she said simply. You helped us stop people who were hurting others. That counts for something. They sat quietly for a while longer, watching the lake. It felt peaceful, a strange calm between the chaos of everything that had happened. After a while, Clara started the car again. Come on, I'll drop you home. As they drove back, Daniel noticed how the light hit her face when they passed through patches of sunlight. She looked tired, but there was a calm strength in her expression. He wondered how many times she'd sat across from people who hated her, who judged her without knowing her story. When they reached his building, she stopped the car. Remember what I said, she told him. If anyone tries to talk to you about the case, you call me first. He nodded. Got it, she smiled faintly. And Daniel, you're doing fine. Don't let this pull you back into the past. That night, he stayed up thinking about everything. The idea that someone inside the department could be helping the very people they were supposed to stop made him uneasy. He realized how dangerous trust could be, but also how powerful it was when given to the right person. The next few days passed without much trouble. Work was the same, life was quiet. But then one evening, as he came out of a store, a man approached him. He didn't look threatening. Mid-30s, casual clothes, a polite smile. Hey, the man said. You're Daniel, right? Daniel froze slightly. Who's asking? The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a badge. Detective Ron, I'm working on the same case you helped with. Clara mentioned you might have noticed something new. Something about the man's tone felt off. Too smooth. Too confident. I haven't seen anything, Daniel said carefully. And I thought Clara was handling that. She still is, the man said. I'm just following up on her behalf. She's busy with something else. Daniel's instinct told him something wasn't right. Clara had been clear, don't trust anyone without confirming with her first. I'll check with her, Daniel said, stepping back slightly. If she says it's okay, I'll call you. The man's smile faded just a bit. Sure, he said, slipping the badge back into his jacket. But don't wait too long. We're trying to move fast. Daniel nodded, but didn't say more. The moment the man walked away, he called Clara. She picked up almost immediately. Everything all right? He told her what had just happened. Her tone sharpened instantly. Did you give him anything? No, Daniel said. I just said I'd check with you. Good, she said. Because there's no one named Detective Ron on our team. Daniel's heart skipped. Then who was he? I don't know yet, she said, her voice calm but firm. Stay inside. I'll send someone to keep watch. That night he barely slept. Every small sound made him tense. He kept the lights off and sat by the window, watching the street below. Around midnight, a car drove slowly past his building, paused for a few seconds, then moved on. The next morning, Clara came herself. She looked serious but not panicked. We're looking into who that man was, she said. It's possible he's connected to the leak inside the department. Daniel exhaled heavily. This is getting crazy. I know, she said softly. But we're getting close. Sometimes things get messy before they get better. Over the next week, the investigation deepened. Clara was constantly on calls, working late hours, chasing leads. But she still made time to check on Daniel. Each time she looked a little more worn out, but her resolve never cracked. One night she showed up at his door unexpectedly, holding 2 cups of coffee. Couldn't sleep? He asked as she stepped inside. Barely, she said with a small laugh. You? Same. They sat at the small kitchen table, the soft hum of the fridge the only sound for a while. She finally said, We found the leak. Daniel looked up quickly. Who was it? A low-level clerk, she said quietly. Someone who handled reports and evidence logs. They were passing information to one of the arrested men's associates. We have them in custody now. Daniel let out a long breath. So it's over? Mostly, she said. But it'll take time to clean up everything. He nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. I guess this is the part where things go back to normal. Maybe, she said softly. But sometimes normal isn't the same after everything that happens. He looked at her, noticing how her eyes had a tired warmth to them. You ever get tired of being the one who has to fix things? All the time, she admitted. But if I stop, who else will? Daniel smiled faintly. You know, you're not like what I thought cops were like. She raised an eyebrow. And what did you think we were like? He grinned a little. Cold, strict, always trying to prove a point. But you're human, she laughed softly. I'll take that as a compliment. It is, he said. They talked for a while longer about everything and nothing. When she finally left, the room felt quieter but warmer somehow. The next morning, Daniel stood by his window watching the sunrise. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he could breathe freely. The city didn't feel hostile anymore. It felt alive, like it was offering him another chance. He thought about how everything had started. The argument, the fight, the night he thought he was just another angry man on the wrong side of luck. But now he was someone who mattered in a small way, someone who had chosen not to run, not to hate, not to give up. That day he went to work feeling lighter. People smiled at him, he smiled back. The world hadn't changed much, but he had. Later that evening, Clara called. The case is officially closed, she said. You did good, Daniel, he smiled. Couldn't have done it without you. There was a pause. Maybe, she said, her voice warm. But you're the one who decided to turn things around. That's something no one can do for you. After the call ended, Daniel stood quietly for a long moment. He looked out at the fading light and realized that life didn't always give you easy paths. Sometimes it gave you storms, mistakes, people who tested you. But sometimes it gave you someone who helped you see yourself differently. Someone who made you believe there was still good left to be done. The next few weeks passed quietly, the kind of calm that felt almost unreal after everything that had happened. Daniel went back to living an ordinary life, the kind he used to complain about but now found comforting. He still woke up early for work, still took the same route through the city, still passed the same coffee shop where the barista always smiled too early in the morning. Only now, things felt different. The noise of traffic didn't irritate him anymore. The small delays didn't set him off. He'd started noticing little things he'd ignored before, like the way sunlight hit the buildings at certain hours, or how the old man at the corner stand always hummed while serving tea. There was peace in the simple rhythm of days. Clara had gone back to her usual schedule at the department. She still called once in a while, not because of work, but to check in to make sure Daniel was doing fine. Their conversations had shifted from tense and serious to light and natural. They'd talk about small things, like music, favorite food, or how unpredictable the city weather was. Sometimes, Daniel found himself waiting for her messages. He wouldn't admit it out loud, but hearing from her had become one of the bright parts of his week. She had a way of speaking that made everything sound grounded even when life felt uncertain. One Friday evening, she called unexpectedly. Her voice had that calm firmness that Daniel had come to recognize. Doing anything tonight? She asked. Not really. Why? There's a small event downtown. A kind of thank you dinner. My team's going, and technically, you're part of the reason this case closed the way it did. Thought you might want to come. Daniel hesitated. Me at a police event? Why not? She said, a smile in her tone. You survived worse, he laughed softly. I don't even own a suit. You don't need one. Just show up. He agreed, partly out of curiosity, partly because the idea of seeing her again felt right. That evening, he took extra care choosing what to wear. Something neat, simple, nothing fancy. He arrived a bit early, parking a block away and walking the rest of the distance. The place was a modest restaurant near the river, with warm lighting and the faint hum of jazz music spilling into the street. When he walked in, the room was lively but not loud. Groups of officers talked and laughed at their tables. The air smelled of roasted food and fresh bread. He scanned the room until he spotted Clara near the corner, talking to a couple of colleagues. When she noticed him, her expression softened into a small smile. She excused herself and walked over. You made it, she said. Yeah, Daniel replied. Didn't want to miss free food, she laughed. Good choice. They found a table near the window overlooking the water. For a while they talked about ordinary things. Work, how the city felt calmer lately, how strange it was to go from chaos to quiet so quickly. Clara seemed lighter too, her shoulders less tense, her smile easier. At one point, one of her colleagues came over, a tall man with a warm grin. So this is the guy you told us about, he said, shaking Daniel's hand. The civilian who helped close the case. Daniel shook his head modestly. I just got lucky. Luck doesn't get people through what you did, the man said, patting his shoulder before walking away. After he left, Daniel looked at Clara. You told them about me? I had to, she said simply. They should know that not every good deed comes from inside the badge. He smiled faintly. That means a lot coming from you. It's the truth, she said. You could have turned your back that night, but you didn't. The evening went by faster than he expected. People shared stories, laughed, and for once, Daniel felt like he belonged somewhere again, not as a stranger or a suspect, but just as a person who had done something right. When the dinner ended, Clara offered to walk him out. The air outside was cool, carrying the scent of rain even though the sky was clear. The streets glimmered under the streetlights, quiet except for the distant hum of cars crossing the bridge. They stopped by the river rail, the water reflecting city lights in scattered colors. It's strange, Daniel said softly. A few months ago I was angry all the time. I thought the world was just out to get me. Now, I don't know. Everything feels different. Clara leaned against the railing, looking at the water. Sometimes it just takes one moment to change how you see things. Or one person. He glanced at her, wondering if she meant him or herself. Maybe both. He smiled quietly. Guess I needed someone to tell me to slow down before I wrecked everything. She chuckled. I didn't tell you to slow down. I told you to think before reacting. Same difference, he said, grinning. They stood there in comfortable silence. The kind that didn't need filling. After a while, she said, You know, when I met you in that parking lot, I thought you were just another angry guy looking for a fight. Daniel laughed softly. I was. But I also saw something else, she said, turning toward him. You weren't just angry, you were lost. People who are lost can find their way again. That's why I gave you the chance to explain that night at the station. He looked at her with quiet gratitude. If you hadn't, I don't know where I'd be right now. She shrugged lightly. You'd still be here. You'd just have taken longer to get here. The night breeze brushed past them, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because he'd finally stopped fighting what he couldn't control. As weeks turned into months, life continued its steady rhythm. Daniel found a better job, one that didn't just pay the bills but gave him a sense of purpose. It wasn't glamorous, managing deliveries for a small local business, but it was honest work. He started saving again, even thinking about going back to school part-time. Every now and then he'd bump into Clara, sometimes at a cafe, sometimes on the street. She'd always ask, You staying out of trouble? And he'd grin and say, Trying to. One afternoon she showed up at his workplace. He was surprised to see her there, dressed in her usual neat jacket, holding 2 cups of coffee. Hope I'm not interrupting, she said, handing him one. Never, he said, smiling. To what do I owe the honor? Just checking in, she said. The department's been crazy lately. New cases, new faces. I miss talking to someone who actually listens. Daniel leaned against the truck, sipping his coffee. You? The detective who talks more than she admits? She laughed softly. Maybe. They spent half an hour talking under the shade of an old tree by the warehouse gate. It felt easy, natural, like catching up with an old friend who'd never left. Before leaving, she said something that stayed with him for days. You ever think about doing something different with what you've learned? Maybe help people who've gone through similar stuff? Daniel thought about it long after she'd gone. That night, he sat at his small kitchen table and wrote down a few ideas. Volunteer programs, mentoring groups, small community projects. It was something new, something that gave meaning to the chaos he'd lived through. Months later, he actually joined one, a small community group that worked with young people who'd had run-ins with the law. He wasn't a teacher or a counselor, but he shared his story, listened to theirs, and helped however he could. The first time he spoke in front of them, he was nervous. His voice shook at first, but as he talked, the words started to flow naturally. He told them about anger, about mistakes, about how easy it was to fall into bad patterns. He didn't sugarcoat anything, but he also didn't judge. When he finished, one of the kids, a boy who looked no older than 16, raised his hand and said quietly, So, people like us can actually change? Daniel smiled. You're not stuck. You just haven't turned the corner yet. That moment changed something in him. For the first time, he saw his own past not as a burden, but as something that could help someone else move forward. A few weeks later, Clara stopped by one of the meetings. She didn't say much, just watched quietly from the back of the room. Afterward, when everyone left, she walked up to him. "You're good at this," she said. He shrugged modestly. "Still figuring it out." "That's the best kind of person to listen to," she said. "Someone still figuring it out." He smiled, feeling that familiar warmth when she spoke. "Guess I owe you for this." She shook her head. "No, you owe yourself. You're the one who chose to turn things around." They walked out together into the late afternoon light. The sky was orange and calm, the kind that made everything look softer. "You ever think how strange life is?" Daniel said after a moment. "If we hadn't fought over a parking spot, none of this would have happened." Clara smiled. "Life has a funny way of introducing people." "Yeah," he said. "Guess some accidents are meant to happen." She looked at him with a quiet smile. Maybe they're not accidents at all. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence carried more meaning than words ever could. From that day on, they stayed in touch often, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They'd grab coffee now and then, talk about life, work, the strange way people cross paths for reasons that only make sense later. Daniel's life wasn't perfect, but it had direction now. He still had bills to pay, worries about the future, moments of doubt. But he also had purpose. He'd stopped being angry at the world because he'd learned that change didn't come from others. It started from within. One evening, as he was leaving the community center, he found Clara waiting by her car. She was leaning against it, smiling. "Still saving the world one speech at a time?" she teased. He laughed. Trying not to mess it up, she handed him a small notebook. "Thought you might need this, to write down the things you don't say out loud." He took it, flipping through the blank pages. "You always bring the right things at the right time, don't you?" "Just good timing," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "You changed my life, you know." She shook her head with a small smile. "You just needed someone to remind you who you were." The sun was setting behind her, casting a golden light across the quiet street. Daniel stood there, realizing how far he'd come from that angry man in the rain months ago. The world hadn't changed much, but he had. And maybe that was enough. He opened the notebook later that night and wrote one line on the first page. "Sometimes you meet people who don't just stop you from falling. They teach you how to stand again." He closed it, smiling to himself. Life went on quietly, honestly, beautifully. And though the city would always be noisy, unpredictable, and full of strangers, Daniel knew now that sometimes the people who cross your path aren't random at all. They're there to change your story, even if it starts with something as small as a parking spot in the rain.